In this lesson, we're going to take a quick look at a couple of key issues in the presidencies of John Adams and Thomas Jefferson. John Adams was our second president, and I mentioned in the last lesson that he was a Federalist. Do note, though, as you can see from the dates here, that he was only a one-term president, and while he might have been a terrific founding father, he wasn't elected for a second term for reasons that we're going to see in a minute. Two laws were passed, the Alien Act and the Sedition Act, that severely curtailed the ability of people to criticize the government during the Adams administration. In short, the Alien Act allowed the president to jail and deport immigrants that essentially he didn't like, but in reality were critical of the administration. Those are the people that he was going after, which goes hand in hand with the Sedition Act. This doesn't involve immigrants. This just involves anybody who was writing or speaking against the government faced the possibility of fines or imprisonment. And it was Adams used this to shut down a number of Republican newspapers, Democratic Republican newspapers that were critical of his administration. So, as you can imagine, these types of laws are going to rub people the wrong way and smack of violating the First Amendment, which today would seem to be quite obvious, not given that everything was brand new at the time, perhaps a bit less so back in its day. Suffice it to say that in the election of 1800, we are going to have our first real transfer of power, as we're going to move from the Federalist Party to the Democratic Republican Party with Thomas Jefferson's election. And we've got our first peaceful transfer of power. This is something to be impressed with, because we as a nation have been managing to hand off transfer of power from one political party to another, back and forth through the years, very successfully. And this is something that a number of nations around the world cannot manage to do. You end up with military coups and all kinds of craziness that happens in the street in a number of other countries that we simply don't have here. We've managed to perfect and basically have always had a peaceful transfer of power. All right, here we're looking at the central part of today's United States, but keep in mind the line in dark blue, this is the Mississippi River, and during early Jefferson's presidency, up to that point, this was the boundary, the western boundary of the United States. All right, very significant river. The port of New Orleans that I'm circling in the southern end of the river was extremely important for farmers in the American West, the area that I'm circling here, the Ohio River Valley, because they would float their crops down the Ohio River, down the Mississippi River, and then at the port of New Orleans, those crops would be transferred from riverboat to ocean-going boat, where they would be taken back to East Coast cities and sold. All right, so here's a look at the port of New Orleans. This would not quite be early 1800s. We have steamships in this picture, so this would be a later point in time, but you get the sense of the activity at the port. Move that out of the way there. All right. The major issue here was that the port was, and the entire city for that matter, was not under U.S. control. All right, it was under Spanish control, and the Spanish stopped allowing us to use the port, which became a major problem for American farmers. The area west of the Mississippi was going to flip to French control at the beginning of Jefferson's presidency, or shortly after Jefferson becomes president. And so Jefferson sends an emissary to France to talk to Napoleon about buying the city of New Orleans. All right, Napoleon, you can see here from the notes, does one better and agrees to sell the entire Louisiana territory, which you see here in dark green, the area known as the Louisiana Purchase, for $15 million. All right, this really is not just the deal of a lifetime, but the deal of many lifetimes. All right, a once and forever opportunity, if you will, that everybody is going to want to take advantage of. So once word reaches Thomas Jefferson, this is a deal that has to get done. The problem here is that Jefferson was a strict constructionist, as we discussed in the last lesson. And as a strict constructionist, the president has no authority to buy land for the nation. All right, so this was a temporary sticking point, but you can see here this was the way that it was worked around. Because we were buying this from France, the contract of sale basically was structured as a treaty, which the president clearly has the authority to make treaties in the Constitution. The Senate's job is to ratify a treaty that the president signs. That was a no-brainer for the Senate because, again, $15 million for a piece of land that doubled the size of the United States really was a no-brainer at the time. So it went through, and under President Jefferson, the size of the United States doubled, and the western boundary you can see here is the area of North Texas and basically the Rocky Mountain chain over here. So the U.S. was going to double in size. And once we bought the land, we had to go and look. And when I say we, President Jefferson ordered Lewis and Clark on an expedition with about 30 people to go and look and see what we had purchased. Keep in mind, Thomas Jefferson was a farmer, so he sent strict instructions in terms of plant life and animal life, and to make notations and to bring back samples and to see when plants first bloom and when the first freeze comes, and all types of farming related information to see if the land was good for farming, and essentially also you can see here from the notes to look for a path to the Pacific Ocean. All right, this is going to be a dangerous journey. We can see here from the map, the journey starts in St. Louis, all right, and then makes its way up the Missouri River. It's the red line that we can see here. All right, they went from 1804 to 1806. All right, they did make it out to the Pacific using the Missouri River, crossing through the Rockies, and then down the portion of the Snake River and the Columbia River, and then made their way back, where people had long thought that they had perished in some Indian fight or other calamity. So when they came back, they were basically hailed as national heroes. All right, and everybody was really surprised to see them. All right, so just to review then, the Alien and Sedition Acts under the Adams presidency allowed the president to silence the critics of his administration. All right, which was part of the reason he only was a one-term president. All right, New Orleans was an extremely important city because of its port and the use of its port for farmers to transfer their crops to ocean-going boats to then go back to the East Coast cities. All right, of course, New Orleans was not under our control, so President Jefferson went to, he didn't go to Napoleon directly, he sent someone to see if we could buy New Orleans, and as we pointed out in this lesson, Napoleon sold his entire territory to the United States, and the deal was structured as a treaty because no one in the government, President, Congress, has the authority to purchase land for the nation. And that brings us to the end of the lesson.